watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello, and welcome to The Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. We are here on episode 26 of the podcast. I'm Eli Price here with Kara Smith. Joining us again, I want to say you joined for The French Dispatch, which I'm like, just going off of memory, I'm pretty sure is Wes Anderson's 10th film.
Okay.
And it's funny because Dunkirk is Christopher Nolan's 10th film.
Wow.
It's like
same
perfect.
Slot.
Yeah, same exact slot. It's meant to be the 10th slot. So whatever director I do next, I'll look at whatever's the 10th movie and be like, I guess Kara's doing that movie.
Hopefully I've seen it.
But we're here. I'm excited. We're really like getting to the end of this series. Only a couple left, really, and it's been a really good one, a really fun one. But today we're really like, this is one of my favorite Nolan movies.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like peek behind the curtain. I'm recording this with you before I've recorded Interstellar, and so that's that's what I usually say is my favorite Nolan, but it's like really tight between this and Interstellar. So I haven't rewatched Interstellar for that episode yet, so we'll see. Maybe I'll like pre-share on that episode since I'm recording it after.
Disclosure.
I'll kind of disclose like, okay, I've decided this one is my favorite or that one, But I'm excited to talk about Dunkirk. Kara, you've been on before, but listeners may be tuning in for the first time or maybe haven't listened to that Wes Anderson series. So do you want to share a little bit about like just what you do with movies? I know you shared last time, but go ahead and share again about like your Instagram and kind of your process of watching movies and rating them and stuff.
Yeah. So, hey, again, I'm Kara. I think last time we had a long podcast, rambling on and on, both of us. But I always like to say that I am not like a cinephile. I am just a lover of movies and a lover of just like media in general. So I love probably TV and movies equally. And I'm not as a critical eye as people often say. I have an Instagram called Kara Rates Things, and I rate movies and stuff, but everyone's always like, you always rate them very highly. But oftentimes I do genuinely, if I saw a movie and I did not like it, I just don't post about it. I feel no need to even, unless it's like a really hyped up movie and I didn't like it, then I'll be like, hey guys, look, I didn't like it. But if it's just a random movie that I saw and I didn't like it, there's no need to report that to the world. Somebody might like it. But for me, I'm just like, hey, if we have a similar vibe, then I liked this movie. You probably would too. And that's just kind of the tone I take. But I love going to the actual theater. So I love seeing movies as they come out. But I also just love rewatching, all of your faves and stuff. So that's, what I do. But yes, it's not as critical of an eye as some. It's just... I loved this. Here you go.
Sure. It's like it's called Kara Rates Things, but it's kind of more like Kara recommends things.
Absolutely.
That she likes.
True. Yeah, that's probably a better name for it, but that might have been too long for an Instagram handle. That's
true. You do rate things though on it.
Yeah, I give them, and sometimes they're a 4 and not a 5. Sometimes they're a 3.72. The ratings are also not consistent throughout. Sometimes I'll change up. Sometimes they're stars. Sometimes they're fractions of numbers. Yeah. It is what it is.
Sometimes you could do there's like a really like funny YouTube series called On Cinema at the Cinema, and they give bags of popcorn. But
Oh,
they
yeah.
but they always give 5 bags of popcorn.
Oh, it's consistent. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
kind of like
I listened to
it's
a
kind of like
Sex in the
yours, yeah.
Yeah, I listened to a Sex and the City podcast, and they do like Manolo Blahniks, like the shoes. They'll give it like half a Manolo. They'll give it like one heel, not both shoes. They'll give it
Yeah.
like, oh, Manolo's best, Manolo's classics. So
Mm,
we all have our own rating systems, and they mean something to us, but not much to everyone else.
right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that whole the Sex and the City rating system would
Yeah.
it means nothing to me. I don't understand
No.
anything you just said. So, but
Yeah.
that's okay. That's
Somebody out there
that's
might.
that's on me, not on anybody else. So, um, yeah, yeah, I love that. Well, yeah, why don't you share what your introduction to Christopher Nolan was? Do you remember the first Nolan movie you saw?
I guess it was The Dark Knight, which
Okay.
I feel like, I mean, that came out years ago. I
Mhm.
was young and I did not like it. But I do remember watching those movies and my dad liking it. I remember him being
Yeah.
like, "Oh, this was a great one," and I was like, "I hated this movie."
Yeah.
So just
Well, it's
not for me.
intense.
It is, and also just in general, I was not into Batman or anything like that. So just
Yeah.
there was nothing in it for me. But I watched it with the family. Everyone else seemed to like it, but I was not keen to go back to Christopher Nolan. I would say that probably the first movie that I saw in theater of Christopher Nolan's was Dunkirk, but I
Mhm.
have since seen Tenet in theater and seen Oppenheimer in theater. So like I have now seen the most recent ones in theater.
Yeah.
I've participated in it and I've enjoyed them, but obviously when
Yeah.
I was younger was not for me. And I actually, of course, saw this one being, I don't remember, I guess I was like, in college. I, of course, saw this
Yeah.
one because Harry Styles was in it. So that's
Sure.
what drew me there. But it was a great movie and just like a great story and interesting piece of history. So this was actually
Right.
my first time watching it and loving a Christopher Nolan film because surprisingly, even for me, I have not seen Interstellar or Inception, which are two of his like biggest works and often like most referenced works
Sure, yeah.
other than like Batman. But
Other than
yeah, but Interstellar, like obviously that's a big such like pop culture moment even. It's referenced in movies and music and stuff, and shockingly I have not seen it, but
yeah.
I just haven't, I guess, sat down and like been like, I know I need to devote time to this if I'm gonna watch it. I need to
Right.
focus, and I just never have.
Yeah. Well, maybe one day, maybe after this podcast,
Yeah.
you'll be like, "Oh yeah, I need to go back
Yeah.
and watch this."
I want to, but I do wish maybe also if they're doing like a special showing in a theater, because
Ooh, yeah.
if for your first time watching some of these big movies, like you should see them on the theater or in the theater on the
Absolutely.
screen. That's where definitely how he intended it.
Yeah. Well, Inception is. I wonder. It's unfortunate. I think Inception's 10-year anniversary was in 2020. So if they might have done some re-releases, but it
probably
wasn't.
not. Yeah, you're
probably
right.
not. Which Tenet did come out in 2020.
Yeah, it
and
was
it
one
did
of my
release in theaters. So
yeah. I remember specifically being at the theater because I think The French Dispatch and like Tenet, stuff like that were some of the first movies I got back to the theater to see.
Right. Yeah, I remember talking about that in that French Dispatch episode. But yeah, you should definitely go back and check those out.
Yeah.
I can understand just like not being into Batman. Like that's totally understandable. If you're not into like superheroes, then it's just kind of like, and being pretty young and watching Heath Ledger's Joker is like pretty intense.
Yeah. I think it also just kind of like scared me and turned me off of it, so I was never going to like get back into it. So yeah.
Sure. But yeah, you should definitely go back and check those out. And The Prestige. I love Prestige as a personal favorite of mine. But yeah, even his early ones are really good. But yeah, Dunkirk. I saw Dunkirk in theaters too. We can kind of jump into the content for today. I saw Dunkirk in theaters. I want to say it was like maybe opening weekend or close to that. And my only regret is that I didn't go like seek out an IMAX theater to see it
Yeah.
in. Because I feel like that would have made it like an even like cooler experience, just more like it would have made, Christopher Nolan happy.
Yeah, for
uh
sure.
but yeah, it's I think this is just like structure wise through and through, like start to beginning, kind of like the there I don't think there's a such thing as like a perfect movie, but
Yeah.
like structure wise and the way everything like plays out, like this is like one of those movies that's like, yeah, that's pretty close,
Yeah.
um
Well, and also the time frame. I do like when I went back and rewatched it, specifically for this, like with trying to, pay attention and
mhm.
get all that I could out of it. I was like, wow, I'm so surprised that this movie is like, I think it was like an hour and 46 minutes. Like
Yeah.
not that long.
Mhm.
So many people, make movies are so long and you're like, okay, I get you're trying to do all this, but he did so much in such a nice
Yes.
time frame.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very efficient.
Hmm.
For sure. It's his shortest movie since his very first following,
Yeah.
which
I'm not
was
surprised.
like an hour and 10 minutes, I think. It was a real short.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, this is definitely his, by a pretty good margin, his shortest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like uh but yeah, so like Nolan talks about back in like the mid 90s, him and Emma Thomas, his wife, sailed across the English Channel to Dunkirk with a friend, and they did it like during May, which is when Operation Dynamo was launched, which is the operation of sending all the little ships over to
Yeah.
rescue the people on the beach. Um, they did it like during the same time of year, and so it's kind of like this experience that they wanted to have. Dunkirk is a really big deal for British people, um, and so they get going, and this trip, I forgot to look up what the mileage is, but it's not like, it's like definitely way too far to swim, but like also not really that
Yeah.
far. um
Yeah.
but it ended up taking them 19 hours to get across because they started running into like terrible weather and like currents, and like
Good grief.
they got across, and it was like this, like, wow, that was like a terrible experience. But also, Nolan says that that was the seed of wanting to eventually tell this story.
Mhm.
Like he grew this like great respect for those civilians that had the
Yeah.
courage to like make that trip across the channel, and like they did it not just like in the possibility of bad weather, but like
Yeah.
with with German planes like firing above, and like knowing that they were just sailing into danger, and
Yeah.
maybe death.
It's truly an amazing like just feat and possibility that so many people agreed to do it and committed to go all of the way, because in a 19-hour journey, if I was Chris Nolan, I'd be like, this was a fun little experiment, but let's just turn around.
Yeah.
And I'm sure
Hmm.
that if so many people on that day, I'm sure thought, you know what, we could just turn around
Right.
and not do this. We don't have
Yeah,
to. We're not, enlisted. We don't have to do
exactly.
this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to say that the Mark Rylance character, Mr. What was his name? Um, I have it written down. Mr. Dawson. Um, yeah, Mr. Dawson is based on like a guy that like it has like a similar story to that character in the movie. He had a son that had died in the war earlier on, and the Navy was like kind of commandeering ships, and he was one of the guys that was like, no, I'm taking my own ship
Yeah.
across, sort of thing. Like an older guy like Mark Rylance is in the movie. So like there's a lot of like cool like historical stuff, and we'll get into more of it as we go. But yeah, the just like, I don't know, it's a really incredible story. And it's a historical story that is like such a part of like the British, what's the right word? I guess the just the British spirit, the British
Yeah. Like their
um,
patriotism. Yeah.
yeah, it's a part of their like their Britishness. Dunkirk
Yeah.
is.
Their heritage. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it both like represents their Britishness, but also like feeds it,
Yeah.
that story. And so, really, like when you think about it, Nolan taking that story on is kind of like a daunting task because,
Yeah. It's a big deal. It's a
yeah,
known event.
yes, a very known event, like
Yeah.
one of the most known events
Yeah.
for
For
British
British
people.
people. Yeah.
It's kind of like I feel like Americans kind of know about it, but it's not like as big of a
No.
thing
Yeah. I mean, we weren't
for
even part
us.
of the war at the time, so it's just
Right,
kind of,
yeah.
yeah, that's not our history.
Yeah, it's
So,
May
as,
1940. We're not even
yeah,
in it yet.
part of it. But it is like the
Um,
true essence of like the British like spirit, or like even like Great Britain as an empire, just like
mhm.
small people, or like seemingly inferior people doing massive feats. Like that is just
Mhm.
like courageously just being like, we're going to go for it, and
Yeah.
accomplishing massive tasks. That's kind of Great Britain's like legacy of
Yeah.
just shockingly small place to have, conquered so much at the time, and then in this to have
Yeah.
accomplished such a great feat.
Right. Right. And so like I had written down this quote. Nolan had said, "I wanted to do something that frightened me a lot," and this is what he kind of
Came
chose to
up
do
with.
at this point in his career. Is I'm going to take on this story, and he kind of like told Emma like, "I think I'm ready to do the Dunkirk story."
Yeah.
And really, like when you think about it, you do if you're going to take on something like this in the way that he takes it on, like you do need like a ton of experience, which he has at this point. Like
Yeah.
this is his 10th movie. He has like great like ongoing collaboration relationships
Yeah.
with his team. Um and so really there hadn't been any modern like tellings of the story in film.
Yeah.
There was a 1958 movie, a Dunkirk movie, that was I haven't seen it, but is supposedly pretty good in its own right. And then like the only thing modern was I haven't seen Atonement either, but there's a scene with James McAvoy in Atonement that like maybe like a 12-minute sequence or something that deals something with Dunkirk. Have you seen Atonement?
No, I have not
Yeah,
either.
me either.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can't really speak to those, but really like just that to say like there's not no one has done it on film really,
Yeah.
at least not since 1958, which would have been over like not quite 60 years ago, I guess, when
Yeah.
they're starting to take this project on. But yeah, and Nolan said this too. He said it is tough to be passionate about something that has already been done. And so that's kind of like
Mm.
part of it too, is like he wants to do something that like hasn't been done before, or like
Yeah.
at least like not in a long time, and definitely not in this way.
Yeah.
And
Well, and
you can go ahead. Yeah.
he also has like, so if the other one was done in like 58, that's not far removed from the events themselves. Like
Yeah.
there's probably so many more like firsthand accounts of things that those people could have worked from, and it would be more of just like a tribute to those who are still living maybe from this event. But he is
Mm-hmm.
now far enough removed from it that he's educating certain people, like Americans,
Yeah.
like other people
Yeah.
from around the world, that probably that first movie they weren't educating, they were making a tribute. And this one he's like, I've got to tell this correctly, because there's plenty of people who
Mm-hmm.
don't even know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you watch it, like it's not meant to be, there's a ton that's historically accurate about it,
Yeah.
but it's not like necessarily this event happened in exactly this way.
It's more
So
the feeling of it, the emotions of it. Yeah.
exactly. Because really like the whole like everything culminating at just the right point and just the right time, like that's storytelling. That's
Yeah.
not like that's like the fictionalized version of this story. It's
Yeah.
all based in reality, but like he's not like trying to make a docudrama. Like he's telling a story that's rooted in, it's like reading historical fiction. Like you learn all kinds of like historical facts, but it is still like a fictionalized story based in that setting.
Yeah.
And that's what he's doing here. Like, I don't know how many people like have thought about that watch this movie, but like, this isn't like, you can't like go in history books and read like,
and
oh yeah,
this people,
Farrier flew over in just the right point in time. It's like, well, no, that's the storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, it's like yes and no, right? But he did go and visit veterans, like all of them are in their 90s at this point. But there were still some living that he went and visited with Joshua Levine, who is he was actually the historical advisor for it. And I want to say he has a book called Forgotten Voices of Dunkirk. Joshua Levine, Forgotten Voices of Dunkirk, that Emma Thomas had given to Nolan as a gift. I don't know what the occasion was, but she had given it to him as a gift, and like he read it and loved it and brought Levine on as like the historical advisor for the movie. And so like Levine of took him around to some of the vets that he had like talked to for his book, and they talked to these guys and listened to stories. And so like some of the things like you see like come from those stories. That like in the special features, one of the veterans was talking about how, on the mole they have the planes were flying over and dropping bombs, and like he recalls like a big hole in the middle of the mole, just like they have to walk over the plank at that one point. So they pulled like some stories like that and kind of like put stuff like that into the movie here and there, which is cool and fun too,
Yeah.
But yeah, Emma Thomas, I love. She kind of talked about how it's kind of nerve-wracking reading Nolan's scripts for the first time. So like, she's his wife, and I'm sure like she's one of the first ones to read his scripts for all of his movies, and she's like, it's definitely like a have a glass of wine beside me kind of thing. Like and I would imagine especially for this one it was kind of nerve-wracking because it's like, it's Dunkirk, like I hope he's done it right. And he had originally too talked to her about like not using a script and just kind of like going in and making it, and she kind of like talked him down from that idea.
Probably a wise decision.
But it was only like a 76-page script, which is probably what I read was that's usually about half of the length that it would usually be for like the budget amount that they worked with, which I want to say the budget was like $100 million, which
is a lot of money, but they do a lot of things with it.
It is a lot, but they really like stretch that. Which he usually does in his movies. Like he really stretches and uses the budget well.
But there's also not a lot of dialogue in this film, so it does make sense that obviously if there was more dialogue, there'd be pages and pages more of that script. But it is like you don't realize how little they're talking until somebody has like a bit of a conversation, and you're like, wow, we've just been feeling. We've been feeling what we're supposed to feel, but we actually haven't been told all of the things,
which is kind of like funny in its own right, because at this point in his career, Nolan was like, that's like the people that liked Nolan movies the least, like that's their main problem, is too much exposition, too much explaining, too much this. And then this movie, he's like, well, I don't have to do those things. I can like, here's a movie where I don't do it at all. So I just like to do those things. It's kind of one of those like, which like I'm sure nothing that I read had him like thinking really in that way. But I'm sure in the back of your head there's like a bit of that, like, oh, you think I can only do like exposition heavy movies? Well, here's one with basically no dialogue.
Well, and if you know that that's one of your biggest critiques and you're really trying to do this particular story well, you know, it might have come into his mind of like, okay, well, I want the critics and everyone to appreciate and like this story because it is such an important story.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, it's Nolan refers to it as the intimate epic. And his goal, he said, when he was writing, was to immerse the audience in aggressively human scale storytelling visually, which, yeah, it's definitely aggressive. And it's definitely visual storytelling, as we've been talking about. And it's, I would like to like look at the script, which I think a lot of Nolan scripts are like, you can just buy them on Amazon.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I think a lot of them are just like published. I don't know who through, but I've seen like, oh, you can buy the Dark Knight screenplay online, which is pretty cool. You don't see that a ton.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder like what those scripts look like, because like, it's not like they're dialogue heavy. So what is he writing, you know?
Yeah. Which also makes me think, you know, his wife's just like looking at this and it's saying, you know, like how is it written that she's just like, okay, I can't even see what you're going for based off of what is here. I mean, he seems like a man who needs like the visuals to understand what he's accomplishing, you know?
Yeah, probably in a sense. But I would guess too, like she's probably, I mean, it's his 10th movie, and she's probably read a ton of scripts, and she's kind of like, she's probably like in the same wavelength as him too. So it's, it's one of those things where it's like, she probably got the picture. But yeah, I mean, like we said, there's no backstory. There's no exposition. No. You just jump right in. Like, you don't know who these people are.
Yeah, you don't know who you're supposed to be rooting for almost like half the
time. And his goal in writing it that way was that it would be a very like visceral, present tense experience, and you would gain empathy for these characters just by being in the moment with them. Which is a really like interesting and different experience than you usually get when you watch movies, just in general. Like, it's not like he invented something new. There's definitely like a lot of movies throughout film history that kind of take that approach. But like, to a movie like of this stature, like that a ton of people go and see, that's like basically a summer blockbuster. It's really like, it's really another just example of Nolan being like, the studio trusts me and I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. Because this usually probably wouldn't sell for this studio. Like a director that doesn't have Nolan's stature coming and being like, here's what I'm going to do. They'd be like,
Yeah, it does go back to his like timing of doing this. One or two movies previous, and they probably would have said, no, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
You know, at some point it might have gotten scrapped, but he had done just enough to prove that like, no, people will see it and go to a big blockbuster film, even if, you know, there's like 10 minutes of nobody talking and you know, all of that.
Yeah, for sure. And his pitch to WB, in his pitch, he referenced movies like recent ones like Gravity and Mad Max Fury Road. Just kind of talking about like that intense, like constant feeling of tension. And then one of the things he said was just forget about the formality of history, which we've kind of talked about. And imagine an entire film with the energy of the third act of a film. And that's really what you get. When you think about this movie, you're like, wow, in a typical movie, this would be the third act of it, and it would be like compressed down to like, you know, the last like 20 to 40 minutes.
Yeah, we would have spent the first like 20 minutes with these boys at home in England before they even went off to war. Like, we would have had so much background. You're right. Yeah.
Right. But you don't need that to, you don't need that to understand who, because at the end of the day, like they're it's not necessarily important like what their individual background is, because they're representative of the young British kid. Like, he has family back home. Like, he didn't, like, it's not like he was like itching
this wasn't his dream.
Like, you can, like, we know what war is, and we know the effects it has. Like, you don't necessarily need all that backstory. And so really, like, it's just like, okay, let's jump right into the third act.
and it helps you get involved emotionally, because instead of being like, oh, I like this kid who we've met in this like first act, and like, oh, I just want him to be okay, you're hopping in there and you're like relating yourself to these people because you don't know enough about them. So you're kind of like putting your own life on top of their storyline and being like, wow, like, I can't imagine running like this guy is through the streets and like trying to take shelter. It's just all the things. It's easier for you to put in your own feelings and just realize like, that could have been any of us if we had grown up in this time and whatnot, and if we were called to war, this is what it would be like.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, there's the famous Roger Ebert quote that movies are empathy machines. And this one is just like, the way it is an empathy machine is it just like blasts you with it. Like, you don't have time to like connect. You just have to like jump in, and like you're just connecting with these guys right away. And another thing that I heard, I don't know how true this one is, because I don't remember what the source was, but I heard that another thing he said in his pitch was that it would be like VR without the headset, like virtual reality without having like the thing on your eyes.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is kind of like what he tried. It's not like he does that like constantly, but like, especially I would say like in the dogfights and stuff, it's kind of like that up in the air. And
it's very immersive. Yeah.
Right. So that was like his pitch to WB, and of course they were like, okay, here's your money, Christopher Nolan. Whatever, you could have just said, hey, can I have some money, and we would have been like, yeah, how much?
I'll make you something.
But yeah, I mentioned, he mentioned Gravity and Mad Max Fury Road, other influences. So he talks about, he used to go into just kind of browse the war rooms of Churchill that are in the Mall of in London. And the book of, obviously, by Joshua Levine, we mentioned. Some film references that he mentions. He mentions David Lean's Ryan's Daughter, which I have not seen. He referenced it in relation to like the immediacy of the elements, meaning like the immediacy of like the weather and just the elements around you, and how visceral that can be, which I haven't seen Lean's Ryan's Daughter, but I have seen Lawrence of Arabia, and the immediacy of the elements of the desert are very very present there. So I can imagine other Lean movies in a similar way. He mentioned Hitchcock's Foreign Correspondent, referencing like the plane crashing into the ocean in that movie, which is, again, Hitchcock that I have not seen. Seen other Hitchcock, not that one.
Not that one.
For like the intensity, along with the ones I already mentioned, he talks about Speed, the movie Unstoppable, and then the movie The Wages of Fear.
You do get that level of like you are on the edge of your seat in the same way that you are in those movies.
Exactly. He another thing he kind of talks about is silent movies, which like you can definitely see like he was really trying to pull from that element of filmmaking, with the very little dialogue. Like you're basically like visual storytelling. It's like watching a silent film. So like he mentions Intolerance, which was an early D.W. Griffith film, who doesn't have the best of reputations after making Birth of a Nation, but was objectively just like and doing some incredible things filmmaking wise.
Yeah.
And then he mentions Sunrise, the F.W. Murnau movie. It's Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans is the full name. And I can see the influence I can see there is like Murnau came out of like German Expressionism, which uses a lot of like German Expressionism is more interested in emotion. Like it's basically art or filmmaking that isn't as interested in plot as it is, or character building as it is in like just helping you to feel purely like the emotion. So everything is like representative of the emotion you're supposed to feel, even the characters. So a lot of times they're like kind of caricatured performances because it's less about like building the character and more about invoking the feelings. And I can definitely see that that influence
for sure.
And too, there was a lot of like montage like used in Sunrise from what I remember. And like, to me, this movie is like a masterclass of montage filmmaking because it's basically just one long, like carefully constructed montage.
Of the events of this day.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of he does mention Saving Private Ryan as being like a bit of an influence, but I thought this quote was funny. Nolan said it had the wrong kind of intensity for Dunkirk. So it's like he appreciated it and like, but I guess like I'm not really sure what that means as far as like what influence he took from it. But
like what did he take from it if he didn't like agree with it, or almost like
like I'm sure he likes the film fine, but it was more like, well, it's intense but in a different way that I'm going for, sort of thing,
which sometimes is just a jumping off point in general of like, okay, well, that's one way to do it.
yeah, those are a lot. I'm sure there's more influences. He always he has this kind of like go-tos of movies that influence. I think there were some that I didn't write down, like Alien, the intensity building there in Alien, which like he has to always get in his Ridley Scott influence into his movies. He loves Ridley Scott, and but yeah, it's interesting to think about how it's a war movie, but the main influences of this film like are not war movies as far as like the artistic side. Obviously, like the history and the setting is influenced by war, but like the actual like techniques and structure and all are like he didn't really look at a whole lot of war movies to make it.
It feels different than a lot of war movies. It really does, and it's like it doesn't necessarily have some of the gore values that some of like some war movies do, or even sometimes the shock values that others do. This had like some shocking moments, but it didn't seem like it was aiming for that. It seemed like it was like, no, I want you here. I want it to feel as if this is happening now for you, not which I guess sometimes the shock value adds to the plot line, and the plot line is not exactly there. It's more of like surviving the day kind of film, and that's so that's different than some war movies that are giving you this big long story and telling you the details of a person or whatever it might be.
Exactly. Yeah, and that makes sense. But yeah, so getting into the production of the movie, it started production May 2016. So they're again starting production right in the same month that Operation Dynamo was begun, was launched or whatever. And they did most of the shooting like on location at Dunkirk, like on the beach. They Chris and his production designer Nathan Crowley, who's been with them for forever, they walked the stretch of I think 18 kilometers of beach before production started, and they had actually I think started already rebuilding the mole which we'll talk about
Mhm.
in a minute. But yeah, it mostly shot like on location at Dunkirk. And then other shooting locations. So they shot in Urk in the Netherlands for like a lot of the open ocean like stuff with the
Okay.
moonstone and whatnot. It's like this. It's basically like this enclosed sea, and I think it's like freshwater. And so they were trying to find somewhere where they had a little bit more like control.
Yeah.
Um,
Of
of
that
the,
element.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, of the elements. But again, like they, I think they got out there and it was just like weather, like the
Yeah.
worst conditions. Like, so it's like, well, maybe it's still a little bit better than the ocean, but maybe not much.
Yeah.
Um,
They're still
and
keeping it true to reality.
Yeah. But the cool thing is that Nolan was very adamant about shooting and just like whatever the weather was, unless it just became like way too dangerous.
Yeah.
So like whatever came at them, he's just like, I think his mantra was just like, just keep shooting, just
Yeah.
keep going. Which is like, I guess like honorable. I guess it like, I guess it a bit represents like that Dunkirk spirit to a certain degree, of
Yeah.
like, I don't care
We're
what.
getting this done.
Yeah, I don't care what Mother Earth throws at me. Like I'm pushing through.
Yeah.
um, and like you kind of hear too, like some of the crew, and I think Emma Thomas said something similar of like, it's really hard work. Like this sort of film they're making is
Hmm.
really hard work. You're working like on location with real like boats and real like rough
Yeah.
water, like and so it's hard. And so the kind of what we were talking about earlier, like that camaraderie you've built with your crew
Mhm.
that you've been collaborating with for a while, is vital. And at that point you kind of you speak the same language, you're on the same wavelength, and so like
Yeah.
you can kind of make those adjustments and roll with the punches better, because of
Hmm.
that.
Yeah. I
um
mean, for sure, if they did not have that connection, it probably would not have been made or accomplished as beautifully as it was, because you wouldn't really know that they had to work that hard to get these shots. Because some of them, I mean, are still like beautifully done, all the
oh
things
yeah.
that you expect and that people want from his
Hmm.
movies because he's done it so well before. So he couldn't have
Right.
flopped out now when he's trying to
Right.
tell the story. So all their work paid off.
Hmm. Yeah, and Hoyte van Hoytema, who's the cinematographer,
Mhm.
he was the cinematographer for Interstellar, was his first movie with Nolan,
Gotcha.
and then he's done all of them since. So this one, and then Tenet and Oppenheimer. But this was his second movie with Nolan, and he had kind of said like, I'm so glad that I had already done a movie with him, because that kind of like connection I already had with him was like so vital for this movie. Um, and like we didn't have to like have as much like talk throughs of stuff. Like
Yeah.
there was a bit of a trust between, going both ways, of like knowing that the other person like could get the job done. Like
Yeah.
they kind of had the same vision.
Mhm.
Um, and I like this. Hoyte said Nolan was unintimidated by things going wrong. Like anything that went wrong, whether it was the weather or something with a camera or whatever, he's just like, just keep pressing on. Like I'm not
Yeah.
intimidated. um,
That's
which
great.
sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I had listened to Roger Deakins, who's a cinematographer.
Mhm.
You've definitely seen Roger Deakins' work, if you don't recognize his name, because he's done a ton of stuff. But he has like a little podcast where he'll bring on other cinematographers and production designers and special effects guys and stuff like that, and do like interviews with them, and they'll talk through like their work and stuff. It's really a cool little
Yeah.
podcast. And that's where I was like listening to Hoyte talk about all this stuff. So it was really cool. Definitely recommend that podcast if that sounds interesting to
Yeah.
you as a listener. But yeah, there was really only a few like set pieces that they had to go. They shot like in a Universal lot in LA, I think. So like there was like the stuff where like they're in the boat underwater as the water's coming in. That's like shot in like a water tank.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
that one I would be a little nervous if he did that one out in the ocean.
Yeah, and then there's like some stuff with the trawler, which is the one that they're shooting into, like that all the guys are like in the bottom, the Dutch ship or whatever. There
and I'm
was
sure
some
probably
stuff,
the interiors at the end, maybe when they're in the house back at home and stuff.
Yeah, the interiors of the trawler is at like on set in a Universal lot, like with a water tank, because they were either in a water tank or they were like, I think I saw in the behind the scenes they had like guys with like hoses like firing water through those little holes on the outside. And then there's like one bigger set piece with like one of the destroyers, the huge ships, when they have that sinking. They couldn't really like sink a full size destroyer, so they kind of had to build something to kind of get those. And I want to say like there's even like one of the scenes where it's like turning, like you can probably remember where the camera is kind of like going with the ship. They had like mounted the camera like on the side of the ship, so like it was like on a set piece or whatever, but like so as it's like going under, like you're actually like getting the camera like going with it because it's mounted on there, which is pretty cool.
That is cool.
Yeah, but like other than those like few things, which are pretty like, when you think about it, like don't take
minimal.
up a huge sections, everything was done like real, which is the big Nolan thing. And to me, like you really feel that in this movie, because I don't know, like when you're in the air, like you feel like you feel like you're in the middle of a dogfight, and you kind of are. Like it's a fake one, but you really are like in the camera, like flying, like mounted to the side of an airplane.
Yeah, you're seeing what you would see if this were. Yeah,
exactly. And like you really are seeing like boats, like they actually did sink some boats, and like it was a controlled sinking, but they did like sink some boats. Like you're really seeing like boats sinking, like the medical boat like crashes into the pier at one point. They actually like built onto some extra onto it so that they could actually like tip it over into that to actually get that wrecking effect. Like it kind of did actually wreck into a faux pier. So just like and you can like feel that when you watch it. It's like visceral and real, and you can like feel that in a way that like I can only imagine like CGI just wouldn't have that feeling,
No,
it's funny, like that was like the big thing with Top Gun Maverick, was like, oh, you're really flying through the air with these guys. And I'm just thinking like, yeah, but Nolan did it first. Like it's
maybe not as many men were forced up there, but and it does make a huge difference. And you see that with every movie that goes the distance to do that. And obviously some people are putting themselves in danger potentially in the ways that they're trying to accomplish this filmmaking. But when it is CGI, or when they do just like some sort of stunt version of it versus the real filming in the air, in the water, on the sand, like it is very different as opposed to all the ways you could do it in a studio.
Yeah. And I mean, you even think about, so like a couple of other things that they did, special effects wise. So like they had a cockpit built on a gimbal, which is, just a thing that can like turn in all directions. And they had like men actually like, parts of the crew like manually like moving it. But they put it at basically like the edge of this cliff. And so they didn't CGI in a background. It wasn't like in front of a green screen. They did it. You actually get real sky background. And they did that like on purpose so that hey, it's real. Like it's it's in a cockpit that we're like manually moving. So there was like certain shots they had to do that way just because of what they were trying to capture.
Of course.
But there are other like cockpit shots where they had the cameras mounted like
within or on
the plane, like looking into the cockpit. On the side. So like those shots where like, you know, you're seeing from like the side and he's like looking over and like waving at Farrier or Collins or whoever. You're actually like the camera's actually like mounted right there and you're actually seeing a Spitfire plane fly it beside him and then fly off. Like it's real, you're seeing it. And just all that stuff is so cool to me. And then on top of that, he shot 75% of this movie in IMAX.
That's so crazy.
I know.
Shame that neither of us saw it in IMAX.
I know, it's really a shame. But yeah, it's incredible. And he's really like done a ton to like push forward that medium, like, and not just like shot in IMAX approved digital cameras. He didn't use digital cameras. It's like the huge heavy IMAX cameras. That's cool. And so you can see while you're watching, there's a few times where it switches the aspect ratio, and it's usually when there's like heavier dialogue going on. And that's because the IMAX camera is so loud. Like, it's like when you're in a kind of a more confined space and trying to pick up dialogue, it's like, okay, we'll use like I don't know I can't remember what they used. I want to say it was like a 65 or 70 mil other kind of camera, or maybe it was 35. I'm not sure. I'm not like well versed in cameras. I'm learning as I go in this podcast, sure. But still not very far from an expert. But yeah, and it's crazy. They're like, not only are they using IMAX, but like starting all the way from The Dark Knight, which we talked about was the first narrative movie to ever use IMAX. Before that, it was only like nature docs that had used IMAX cameras. And so like he's pioneering not just using IMAX cameras, but like developing new like engineering ways to like mount them and use them handheld. Like Hoyt van Hoytema, you can see like has like this like engineered handheld like thing that he's like using to carry a huge IMAX camera. I mean, it's probably like the camera's probably already at least 50 pounds, and like he's got this big contraption on him to help him carry it. That's probably like makes it weigh even more. It's nuts, and he's just like, no, this is going to be big. And I don't know. It's like he could have easily just like put some like small, easy to mount digital camera up there on the airplanes, but he was like, no, let's mount an IMAX camera to it. It's kind of nuts, but really awesome.
But I mean, he did it. And I mean, once you accomplish that, there's new and improved ways to do things, and it inspires others to be like, all right, well, let's try to figure out our own way to carry this around or make it happen and get the shot. And I mean, so they not only are they like mounting the IMAX cameras on the planes, they had a plane or two where they actually like built they like deconstructed and reconstructed the nose and the tail of the plane to like encase an IMAX camera, so that like you could fly behind like the Spitfires in that plane, and you're actually like flying behind them. Like the camera's just wherever he points the plane, the camera points. And so and same That's for impressive. Like the tail. Really, really cool. And then like they're developing these like rigs to like
put on a boat. So like when you're seeing like the moonstone like going through the ocean, you're kind of following alongside of it. There's actually a boat with this rig that is engineered in such a way that like it's like stabilized, and so like those are like really smooth shots like going beside the moonstone. It's actually like on a rig on a boat like following the moonstone, but like it's like engineered in such a way that it's stabilized. It's not like bumpy.
Smooth.
Yeah, which is so they're like even like developing these new like engineering techniques for like using the cameras. So it's just like all around just totally impressive.
A big win for him to accomplish all of this, and like you said, with the elements and still being able to keep those, cameras mounted the way that they had done it themselves. Like they don't have a guide on how to do this; they're figuring it out as they go. So that's impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the one like nightmare story from the production is they had one mounted on like kind of a Spitfire model that they built that they used to so when Collins wrecks and you get the kind of view of like the plane skidding across the water from the side, like that side view of the plane skidding across the water. They had an IMAX mounted on that, and they had a barge out in the ocean, and they shot that plane that they built off of the barge to get that like skipping across the water effect.
Oh, okay.
And the problem was it almost immediately started sinking, and like they couldn't get to it, and so like the plane with the IMAX camera went down to the bottom, and like divers went down, and it took them like about an hour to like recover the camera, and obviously like the camera is ruined, but the film inside was fine.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and that's
a win.
That's actually, it's funny because like it's one of the like resilient things about film. It's actually like it gets more and more delicate over long periods of time, obviously, but like whereas like a digital camera would have just been fried, and you're like, oh, are we going to be able to recover what was on there? The film, like you pull the film out and it's like, oh, it got wet, but it's fine. You just let it, you let it dry, you clean it up, and you still got all the footage you needed. So there's a bit of Dunkirk spirit in film too, in real film.
For sure. That's funny.
Yeah. I love that I love those funny little nightmare stories, but it's a nightmare because you ruined an IMAX camera. It's like not cheap,
No, that'll eat out the budget.
Oh yeah. I could, you could probably talk on and on and on about all the production stuff. There was just a couple of other examples of like how they did things in reality instead of like adding in CGI. So they had a ton of extras, obviously, like lined up on the beach and all those lines. But for like the distant lines, like out in the distance, instead of like CGI adding in extra like dudes in post, they built these like cardboard cutout lines that they like had like basically like it had printed on. They printed out these like pictures of like they took pictures of the actual like extras lined up, and they printed them out and like pasted them to these like cardboard cutouts and like hand painted to like add in some details. And I think put it on aluminum. It was like this technique that he had heard that was used from from an older movie to get this effect of like motion a little bit from the sun glinting off the aluminum. And so there's just these, like, you can look up pictures, like there's just these lines of like cardboard dudes.
But then they align it with the shot so that it looks like it just
it's like impressive. It's like way back far in the distance, so it's like kind of out of focus, but it looks real, like it looks like there's real guys out there,
the light and everything.
Like I didn't notice, like I watched that afterwards and I was like, I would have never
and never once did I think that there was a CGI moment or anything like that to be like, oh, wow, that's impressive.
And I don't, now thinking about it, like, I don't remember seeing any. There might have been the only time that I can think that I might remember seeing some green screen behind it was that when I was talking about like the destroyer sinking, that big set piece that they used.
Yeah.
But even that, it was like in this outside water tank, so you still had like some sky going on. But I think that scene was in the dark, so they might have had to like done
Adjust
something,
that. Yeah.
adding in CGI in the background there from the green screen. I'm not really sure, but other than that, I didn't see anything that was like CGI. Like there's a lot of times you'll see like, oh, this movie used this much VFX, visual effects, but visual effects does not mean CGI.
CGI, yeah.
Visual effects is basically like just, I don't know, a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about is visual effects.
Yeah, any sort of like little cheat of the shot of the eye of whatever to make it seem larger or more people or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Yeah, like the explosion like when the bomber comes across the beach towards the beginning, and Fionn Whitehead's like characters like ducking down. He's in the foreground of the shot, and you can see the like the explosions coming. Those are like real like air cannon like explosions, like shooting up sand. And then like the dude that's like not far from him that like goes up in the air. Like even that wasn't CGI. They had like a crane with this like bungee cable that like pulled him off.
Snatched him. Yeah. Wow.
At just the right moment. So like really like everything. It's just that like that determination to like everything that I can shoot in camera, I'm going to. And like at the end of the day, like I think another thing I remember Hoyte saying in that interview with Deakins was that really like all the money and effort that a lot of movies use in post-production, adding in all this stuff, Nolan like uses the same amount of money and the same amount of like effort and energy, but it's just in pre-production. It's in the preparation for it. Like the prime example is the mole. They rebuilt that mole, so most of it wasn't still standing. It's like a long stretch of it. They didn't rebuild like the full stretch, but they actually got like the original blueprints for it from the port of Dunkirk.
Wow. That's cool.
And like rebuilt it like to those specs the best they could. And they were constantly having to like, there would a storm would come through and like break part of it, and they would have to come back in and like reinforce it and stuff. And so like that's a massive undertaking. Like when you're watching that, it's like a real like pier, real mole that they like actually built for the movie.
It is impressive, but again, it's all of that time and effort, but just in a different way and at a different time. And I mean, in the end, I think, you know, we all see the effect that it has also, I'm sure on the actors as well, to really be doing something versus being like, okay, you know, the floor is green right now, but remember, you're supposed to be walking a plank. So like, keep your feet in line, just all of the things that, you know, make it, I'm like, obviously actors are actors. They're supposed to be able to accomplish this, but when you have extras, when you have people like for everyone to be there in real time and be on a pier and to understand like where to stand, how to stand. And it looks so real because it is real. They all are balancing out there, or standing out there. They're cold, they're whatever. And it, you know, it really plays out.
I remember Harry Styles in like making of interview was basically saying like, you know, when I'm like in the water out there, like I'm not acting. I'm really like cold and trying to swim to get to a boat. Like he was just, I thought it was funny. He's like, it's really like he creates an environment where like you really like don't have to do much acting. You're like just in reality.
Which I mean adds to the reality that we see, but also I mean, wow, what a first movie to be part of.
For sure.
I mean,
and there's like there's this like rumor that like Christopher Nolan didn't know he was like part of One Direction when he auditioned, and I'm like,
that's funny.
Really? You didn't know? I'm like, I find that hard to believe.
Hard to believe, but maybe he just really is not in touch with pop culture. Maybe he just
Yeah,
has
I
no
mean,
interest at all.
I feel like at this point he had like teenage daughters, and so it's like, and he's
Surely then
British,
he would know.
like surely he would know, but at the same time, like it's a man that has no email address and no cell phone, and so like
Hey,
it's kind of like, maybe
it's
he just really is.
possible. Or at the very least might not have known the magnitude of what
Maybe,
this
yeah.
boy band was. Just thought like, oh, okay, so he like has dabbled in
Yeah.
singing, not like, oh no, people will go see this
Yeah.
movie because Harry's in it, and
Yeah,
hopefully they like
it
the
really
film.
did. There really was a lot of people that went. It's like, oh, I want to see Harry Styles in this movie,
Yeah.
and it's like, I wonder if they were disappointed because it's like,
It's
get
very
a
minimal.
whole lot of Harry
No,
Styles.
I will say that's one of the reasons I went. And
Yeah.
I mean, of course, like it just was a good movie. So
Mhm.
if it had been a bad movie or if you had been bored or whatever, then you'd be like,
Yeah.
well, dang, like I didn't even get to see
Yeah.
him much. But
What a
you showed up
waste.
and you're like, hey, that was a good one.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Another thing that I love about this is the score, which is just like,
Yeah,
just
it's
in
big.
your face. Like,
Yes.
he's like, Hans Zimmer is really like shoving this score down your throat. And it's
Yeah.
like, I love it. I love him for it,
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like sometimes Zimmer scores can be like a bit
Overbearing.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, overbearing, a bit much. It's like, okay, Zimmer, we get it. Like, you like big sounds.
Yes.
But this movie, it feels so. The score is. I think part of it is because the score is so like intertwined with the sound design. Like they're kind of like, you can't have the sound design without the score. Like they go hand in hand, and they're kind of melded together. And I think I remember like in the special features kind of talking about how, he had Zimmer involved when they were working on like sound and vice versa. And so, I mean, like when the plane is coming in, like that ever rising, like,
Yeah.
like it's kind of part of this, like it's the sound the plane's making. So it's like, the sound design, but it's also like part of the score too. Like it's adding to the music.
Yeah.
That you
and I
hear
think
too.
it also adds to the fact that there isn't a lot of dialogue in this. So in a situation where you might have somebody giving you real emotion by what they're saying, how they're saying it, they might be screaming, crying, all of this other stuff, and yelling at somebody, that you're not getting that as much. I mean, you occasionally do, but you're not getting that for the whole movie. So to have this music guiding your emotions as well, or like amplifying something where everyone else is silently running or doing whatever it is they're doing, and the music is really giving you that like dialogue and the emotion.
Right. Yeah. And I think so one of the quotes that I had written down that Zimmer said that I thought was funny, he said, if there are method actors, I suppose I'm a method composer. And and then he like goes on to talk about how he they were shooting and he happened to be kind of not able to like swing by. And he went out on the beach and like he took a jar and like put a handful of sand in the jar and like took it with him. And it's like, oh, that's like kind of funny. He was just kind of like laughing at like, oh, this might sound like dumb, but like, I felt like, I guess he kind of felt like, oh, I need that connection while I'm that artistic connection, while I'm making the score to this sand from the real Dunkirk beach. I thought that was funny. But the ticking, so the ticking in the score, like that's actually recorded from one of Nolan's watches.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so they took one of his like, I think it was a stopwatch that he has, and recorded the ticking from it and included that in the score, which I think is really cool.
That's cool that that's how it was done, but it's also just, it's such an important element because it is like that ticking, any like constant beat it's your heart rate. You're on the edge of your seat because it's in time,
Well, like the right from the get-go, there's that kind of like heartbeat in the score too, which is, I guess you could say, is a bit manipulative, because it's almost like making your heart race along with the score, but at the same time, like, it's not without purpose. Like, you're with these dudes that probably are having like an elevated heartbeat, and
of course, they can hear it in their ears as they're running and stuff.
It's their heart, they feel it in their throat, just like you do from the score.
And I mean, the score is, I feel like the score in any film ought to manipulate you a little bit,
Sure,
just the same in like a horror movie. Like it has that same, not that I like horror movies, but you could just watch a trailer. Like, it has the same, impulses, and it's supposed to add so much of the effect. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in there. They would not pay these guys the big bucks to,
for
to
sure.
do all this.
For sure. This, it's funny you say that. I think this is like the closest Nolan has ever gotten to making a horror movie. Like, this is, it has that kind of intensity. Obviously, like, it's not by any means a horror movie, but like, there's elements where he's like using some of those. I mean, he mentions, Alien, which I would say is a horror movie. Like, using those intensity building elements.
Even using the
score
silence.
Is part of that.
The
for
score,
sure.
The silence of people not talking, the real panic and fear of these guys of really not knowing what's coming next. And they do have like this, this villain, this enemy, this, scary thing that could potentially strike at any time, and they have no idea which direction it's coming from. I mean,
and you
obviously
don't see
war. No, and obviously war is kind of a horror movie, like it is. But it is just the real life, just truest, rawest version of like being horrified and being terrified of what's going to come next. And just surviving.
The enemy almost is like a ghost in this movie. Like, you never once see a German soldier the whole movie.
No.
But it's
you
like
never
this
hear them say Nazis or anything like that.
It's this ever-present threat, though, that hangs over the whole movie. So it is like a bit like haunted in that way. But the big thing in this movie, with the score, was he took it, and he's used it in other movies. Like, you can hear it some in the score for The Prestige. You can hear it in some of the sound design for like the Bat Pod and The Dark Knight. But it's this technique of using something called shepherd tones. Have you ever heard of shepherd tones?
I've never heard the term, but I'm sure I have heard them.
You definitely have, because you heard it all through this movie. So like, it's basically like an audio illusion. So like, think of a visual illusion of a barbershop pole, how like as it turns, it looks like it's always going up, but it's a visual illusion. It's not always going up, and you kind of know that, but you can't make your eyes unsee that illusion. And it's basically that same concept, but like for your audio. So like, it's this layering of these rising tones. So you have like this higher octave, this middle octave, and then the lower octave. And so the middle octave kind of like repeats. It goes up, 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 and repeats. And then the higher octave starts off, I think, hot, like louder, and then gets quieter, and then repeats. And the lower octave starts, it's the inverse, whichever way they are. And what it does is it creates this effect where you can look up YouTube videos that like visualize it, which was helpful for me, that are cool. Like, if you're listening at home and you're like, oh, I want to pause and like go look up shepherd tone YouTube video, like, it's actually like really cool. But it basically creates this illusion of an ever rising tone. So like, it tricks our ears to thinking like that the tone is just like continually rising in pitch, when it's really not. It's this illusion, sort of like the barber pole. And so like, when you can think of one of the like prime examples, it's in the actual music of the score, but like, in the sound design, like the planes. So when the planes are approaching, you hear that, and it just sounds like it's just like infinitely going up the pitch. But it's not. It's an illusion. But it creates this intensity, and this
For
like
sure.
anxiousness, is like the effect it has on you.
Because
which is
of
really
course,
cool.
it does have that, again, like horror-esque of like, okay, it's coming. Eventually, it's gonna give, like, something's gonna happen, and then obviously, like, it doesn't, but it creates that fear.
Right. Yeah, and I just think that's really cool. And something Nolan wanted to do kind of along with that is he wanted to take that idea of a shepherd tone and kind of apply it to his structure of his movie. So he wanted to like build ever and like intensifying sequences, building, where it feels like the tension is just like constantly rising through the whole movie. And never like, he never wanted there to be a moment where it felt like you like flattened out or like went down in intensity. He wanted it to just feel ever rising in intensity, which it sort of does. I think there's a couple of moments where you kind of like, I don't think you ever go down.
Rest, maybe a plateau, kind of.
A little bit of a plateau in a few moments, but other than that, like pretty like perfectly executed as far as that goes. The only other thing about the score, when there's the one moment where there's, the score kind of changes, and that's when the little ships finally arrive from across the channel. That moment is it is Elgar's Nimrod from the Enigma variation, which I've never listened to, but Nolan, I wrote down this quote from Nolan. He said, "I didn't really say this to Hans," talking about Hans Zimmer, but it played at my father's funeral a few years ago. I just find it unbearably moving. So I just thought that was kind of a sweet little like moment of vulnerability from Nolan. Like, I really just wanted this in here because like he finds it moving, and it really is that moment. I find that moment moving.
Absolutely. It's so,
and the score matches it so well too, I think.
It's such like a hopeful like relief of a moment, and that is, and the music, the score adds to that, which it's also interesting then that played at his father's funeral, just because of, I can imagine that would be so incredibly emotional when
for sure,
in that situation.
So this movie, I'm gonna make sure I didn't like miss any like cool. Nope, I think I pretty much hit all the cool stuff. There's more cool stuff, but like I said, it's funny. The special features, like making of doc, is actually longer than the movie. And so like I watched a whole another movie basically, just about like the special features and the making of the movie. So
that's funny.
There's a ton of stuff.
Sure.
A little, just leave it at that. But yeah. So the movie, one of the first things he did when he finished was he screened it for a bunch of veterans, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Nolan said it was both like daunting and moving to do that, which I can imagine. But yeah, the movie comes out in the summer of 17, and it really like just got like fantastic critical response. Like the word masterpiece was thrown out. Like it was like that degree of like good critical response. And I mean, there was some, like, as with any Nolan movie, there's some like detractors out there. Like some just kind of like only saw it for like the technical aspects. Which I guess I get, but like I don't see how you aren't pulled into the emotion of it too.
I
honestly just don't get that response. Like, oh, it's just like clockwork and this like exercise in like precise clockwork like timing, and I'm like, No, it's not.
I think that people, walk into a
Yeah,
thing wanting to be critical, and of course,
maybe so. Yeah,
some of those people can only ever do that. But
yeah,
I would be very surprised. And again, like I went in for the for mostly the Harry Styles of it all. I went with
yeah,
my parents. They went because they were like, okay, yeah, like it's a Chris Nolan film. But I mean, and I was a part of the Harry Potter or not Harry Potter, Harry Styles like discourse of it all. And like, yeah, there's so many fans of Harry Styles who went in to see this movie and were like, wow, what a great movie.
yeah.
Like what,
Mhm.
a touching kind of moments. And even if there wasn't a lot of dialogue, there's still so many emotional moments, not just because of like, oh, the threat of war and like the fear of survival and all of that, but also
Mhm.
just, even with George, dying and
Yeah.
then his friend putting him in the paper and all of that stuff. Like the moments that we do have dialogue and that we see backstory or we understand these people, it's so overwhelmingly
Mhm.
beautiful and emotional and like lasting, because that's one of some of the stories. Like when I went back to watch it, I was like, I remembered the French soldier who's just so desperately trying to make it. It
Yeah.
was helping them. And then of course George, who was yeah, it was like all my
Yeah.
favorite characters died because that's how it
Yeah.
goes. But it's just having all these really touching
Right.
stories, even
Yeah.
though that's not exactly the point. Like these little stories aren't
Mhm.
the point. It's more of just like a
These little choices,
testament.
though, they all add up.
Yeah, they do.
Uh,
I mean, he
yeah.
obviously very much accomplished everything he set out to do, even in the ways he did it. Like all of those things, we see them come through, and they all paid off for him.
For sure. Yeah. Um, yeah. So Emma Thomas said that this movie is the sum of everything we've learned in our prior movies, and I really feel like
Mhm.
that comes
Yeah.
through. And we've kind of been like touching on that here and there of just like the maturity of him at this point in his career,
Hmm.
and not just him, but like his whole team that he's worked with so much. Like
Yeah.
you we work together on so many different like projects, making this art, and eventually like you're able to make something that's so like just like precisely put together and like
Yeah.
visceral and like just it's I mean it's an experience.
Hmm.
It's a capital E experience,
Yeah.
of a movie. And you don't get that a whole lot. I mean, when I go and watch, an Avengers movie, like it's like there's a lot of stuff happening and there's some exciting moments, but I wouldn't say like that it's a capital E experience like
No,
this
because
is.
again, those movies, like in the Avengers movies, and the reasons why, yeah, I don't love superheroes, but the reasons why I did love the Avengers is like those stories are telling you the stories of these people. They're giving you the backstories and
Right.
the friendship, the camaraderie, the connection between the characters. And I
Hmm.
think that obviously we all love that as like movie watchers and just storytellers. Like, we love seeing connections of people
Right.
and hearing their backstory, but him drawing back from that and not giving you as much of that, it really does elevate the experience because you're not so focused on the individuals necessarily and like those
Right.
storylines and reconciling what happens to this one guy. Like it's not about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Um, One of the things that Nolan kind of spoke to, so the film comes out, and this was around the time that the whole Brexit thing was happening,
Yeah, yeah,
which was like a huge ordeal. I remember like hearing a ton about it even over here
yeah,
in the States, and which Brexit, it was basically like Great Britain deciding to leave the UN, um, and some people might be listening and be like, "What is that?"
oh yeah,
But yeah, there
to
were
leave
a
the
lot of
EU.
people.
Yeah,
Yeah, there were a lot of people that like within that Brexit movement that kind of co-opted this film, like for like not national fervor and stuff.
Yeah.
And this is Nolan's response to that whole ordeal. He said, Dunkirk has always been a Rorschach test for people, but I think the confusion we see today between patriotism and nationalism is extremely tricky. I don't believe we want any political faction to own patriotism or to own Dunkirk, which I thought was really like insightful of him.
Yeah.
Like as a response to that, because like when you make something like this and then like a group of people kind of like co-ops it and is using it in a way that like you don't believe in, you can get accusations thrown your way, like you're enabling these people and that sort of thing. And I just thought that was an insightful quote of like, one political faction cannot own patriotism. Nationalism is a whole different story. But he's half British, but he's more British than not, and he has the accent, so I mean,
and he's full-fledged in our eyes.
But yeah, he's a dual citizen technically of America and Great Britain. But yeah, I just thought that was cool, insightful, and it really like along those lines, like the movie does feel very apolitical, because it's not about like this side or that side. Even though like you kind of watch it and like which side you should root for.
Yeah, of course.
Like that's kind of just built into watching a World War II movie. It's not about the sides like we talked about. Like you never even see a German soldier. It's just about survival, really.
Yeah. And I mean, you have a bit of that in-group, out-group with the British versus French soldiers, but at the end of the day, like these people aren't talking like, unlike other war movies or especially World War II movies where you're seeing like, oh, here's our, plans to win this battle, to take over this area, like whatever. These guys are not doing that. They're like, let's just get home. Let's just get home before we regroup, before we talk about like what is going to happen next in this war and like who we're against and all that type of stuff. So it really, it does scale back the like political parts of a war and just down to how are all these boys going to make it another day? Yeah,
for sure.
Which is universal.
It's universal. It's a human. It's about a human experience. But yeah, and even on top of that, like along similar lines, a lot of war films when you watch it, they kind of fall on different ends of, I guess you could call it a spectrum, but they a lot of times they're either like an anti-war film. Yeah. So like it's trying to portray war
as like such a dirty thing and like such a horrific event.
Which is usually my preference. I usually like if there's the other way of that you see war films go is they kind of like sentimentalize like the victory of it all.
Yeah,
and romanticize is another good word.
The violence or the the battles and things.
Yeah, if not even, I mean, maybe like not even, some probably do, but I guess like the being generous, like the better ones like aren't necessarily like romanticizing the violence, like they show the horror of that, but like romanticizing the idea of like victory over enemies, sort of thing.
Yeah. And like the good conquering evil in the most basic sense. Yeah.
And this like, so like you kind of have those two different types of war movies, which most kind of fall into one or the other. I would imagine. Obviously, like I haven't seen every war film, but a lot of the ones I've seen kind of fall into those two categories. And this one really kind of feels like this middle ground, though. Like it's for sure anti-war. Like you don't watch this film and be like, oh yeah, war. Like,
like I want these guys to go back out there. Yeah, you kind of want them to go home and stay home. Like
right. And then like, but at the same time, there is a bit of like victory to it. It's just like not maybe romanticized in exactly the same way. So it's kind of like you watch this and you're like, man, with this was a moment in history,
Yeah.
and it's not like for war, but at the same time, like it's appreciative of this moment that was so pivotal and so
Yeah.
like inspirational for a whole nation and like side, I guess.
Yeah.
And so like it's kind of like this weird middle ground between those two movies, which is just another way that it's like unique within the genre, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree.
yeah. But yeah, so that was kind of like a big sidebar. But yeah, the movie opens in 2017. Nolan loves those June or July. I'm sure it opened June or July because that's when all of his movies open. But it earned 527 million worldwide, which is a really, like, honestly, a big haul for a movie like this. And I'm not sure how much Harry Styles had to do with that. But I'd like to imagine it was mostly because it was a Nolan movie. And like we've talked about
because it
many
was
times,
so
Nolan
critically
gets
acclaimed as well.
seats.
Yeah, he does. He does. And it opened with such good reviews that it was like, okay, we're not, most people
gotta
like
go see this
trickle
movie.
effect. Everybody's like, oh yeah, then I guess I'll be there because it's done great. Yeah.
And it was obviously like his highest grossing film ever in Britain. In Great Britain. Like, makes total sense. I was actually listening, the Ringer Podcast Network has a show called The Rewatchables, and they had Quentin Tarantino on for the episode they did on Dunkirk, and it was like Tarantino's suggestion for that episode for the rewatchable like movie or whatever.
Movies. That's cool.
And he kind of it was cool because he talked about just like a brief overview of his like little story he told. He saw it the first time and like he was like obviously like very impressed, but like didn't necessarily connect with it emotionally. And I can't remember if it was his like second or third time seeing it, but like he happened to be in London for something, and he had a little bit of time on his hands, and he was like, I should see Dunkirk. I'm in London, I'm in Great Britain, I should see Dunkirk here. And so like he like tells a story, like he goes in and the guy at the ticket counter is like, oh yeah, you're gonna love it, and then like the girl ripping his ticket, it's like, oh, it's fantastic, you're gonna love it. And so like he's already going in like with this mood of like, oh, these people like love this. And he was talking about how like these weren't like older people, these were like really young like kids, like, and they like were so like excited about this movie. And then like he said, just like he just talked about how like watching it in that theater with a theater full of British people was like actually like a really powerful experience. And like he said, you could like just feel the emotion in the room. And it just like elevated the movie for him. And I just thought that was like a really cool like little story. That I don't know, just like putting myself in those shoes, I can imagine just like how surreal of an experience that would be,
Sure.
But yeah, I like I said, I love this movie. It's so good. They did get, so he had gotten some Oscar nominations before, but this was his first big haul of nominations. He got 8 nominations for this one. And so he got 8 nominations and won 3. The 3 he won was in sound mixing. Well, so like, I guess I should say like when the movie wins for like sound mixing, sound editing, and film editing, which are 3 that it did, it's not actually like Nolan that gets the Oscar for those.
Of course.
It's the sound mixer and the sound editor and the film and the editor of the movie that get the Oscars for those technically. But Nolan's a big big part of that.
Yeah.
But it also got nominated for original score, production design, and cinematography. And then like this was his movie where he got nominated for best directing, and got nominated for best picture. And so like it was really a big deal of a movie for him. In that sense. He didn't win best director. I can't remember who won best director that year. I forgot to look that up. I do know that it lost best picture to Guillermo del Toro's Shape of Water. Was the year that won. Which is funny because like for Memento in the special features, there's like this interview with Del Toro interviewing Nolan about the movie, and like Del Toro like loves it and stuff. So they're actually like close. And so I wonder if it was like kind of this like, you got me this time kind of thing. Like, they like
Maybe.
respect each other. So, you know, but yeah, I just thought that was cool. I feel like he should have won. So for me, that was like my favorite movie of that year. I wish it would have won. To be honest, I haven't seen Shape of Water, but
yeah. I guess Guillermo del Toro won both. They won both picture and director.
Oh, he did?
Year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which, you know,
Del Toro oftentimes they go. Yeah, and oftentimes they do end up going hand in hand with director and pictures. So you know
they do sometimes and then sometimes though they do, or they're like, oh, we love this movie too, and so they'll kind of split
it. Too good, so that Which I am a bit surprised that they didn't split it with Dunkirk, just because of how well it did. But I'm sure, surely he won 1 million BAFTAs though that year. I'm sure, especially being within the UK.
It didn't win Best Picture BAFTA either. I did look at that. It won something. I don't remember what it was though.
I'm surprised that in the UK he couldn't have pulled it out.
Yeah, it came in second. It said, I think. But yeah, it's, you know, obviously a great movie, and the cast. That's the other thing we haven't really touched on a whole lot. One of the things he did was like he wanted to cast like as many like young men that were kind of more unknowns in acting as he could, to kind of get that feel of these, you know, anonymous young men as soldiers. Which he did, you know, to great effect. Fionn Whitehead, who plays the character's name is Tommy, and I'm like almost 100% positive you never hear the word Tommy said.
I don't think you ever hear that.
No. But that's what he's like listed as Tommy. And I want to say I heard that that's kind of like a British term for like an anonymous soldier.
Okay.
So I guess
like if they named him John Doe, or like, you know, John Smith.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I think that was like the idea there, but I think he did great. I don't think I've seen him in anything before or since, but
I don't think so either. Because I mean, some of these, of course, like the, you know, actor who plays George.
Barry Keoghan.
Like obviously he goes on. I feel like this was probably the first thing I've seen him in, but I've seen him in, you know, multiple things since.
Right.
And he's done very well for himself. Obviously, even Harry's gone on, but I mean, you know, then of course there are the people that we do know, like Tom Hardy and things like that we knew before, we knew then.
Keoghan was fairly new. He had just been in The Killing of a Sacred Deer is a Yorgos Lanthimos movie with I want to say Colin Farrell's in that. But so he had been in that. That wasn't nearly as big as this, obviously. It's but he really hadn't been in a whole lot. That was kind of like, that was really like when he was kind of breaking in. But yeah, I think he's a fantastic actor. Other things I've seen him in since, but yeah, that's kind of his big thing. There's some other like unknown guys, like you have Tom Glencarney, who plays Peter, Mr. Dawson's son, George's friend, and again, just like a guy I don't think I've heard of before or since.
Same.
Jack Loudon, who plays Collins. never, I don't know. Like,
Yeah. Don't know him.
yeah, Gibson, the guy, I think Gibson is is it Gibson or Collins? That's the French guy.
I think it's Gibson.
Yeah, that his name is Aneurin Barnard. I think he was a Welsh actor.
Oh, okay.
So still British, I guess, but
Yeah.
but yeah, putting on the French accent. And then there's actually like a surprise appearance by Michael Caine, technically, in the movie. He's the voice of Fortis Leader, I think is what they call him.
I didn't hear it. He really does have such a distinctive voice, but I didn't hear that the first time I watched it. And then this time in like knowing that like, oh, he's in it. Because I remember that being kind of a discussion and just like a little pop culture thing of like, of course he's going to be in it. But I don't remember sitting there thinking that. But I think it's also just a matter of like the kind of immersive experience of it all. That's not what I was paying attention to.
Right.
Whereas in some cases you'd be like, oh, who is that voiceover? I know that voice. But I didn't have time to think about it. I was trying to figure out what's going on, what's going to happen,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's all. You just hear him. I mean, I think he has like 3 lines that he says.
It's not much.
Over the radio. And I mean, because that plane goes down pretty soon in the movie. And then we've talked about Harry Styles, who I thought was really good in this. A lot of it is pretty like understated acting. He has the one moment, I think, in the bottom of the trawler where he really like gets to like be like kind of
show
like
some acting skills,
right, expressive and like loud. But other than that, it's pretty like most of the performances are pretty understated, and part of that's just because like it's just like basically silent acting. I mean, you have like Mark Rylance, I think, is like great as Mr. Dodson. Like he carries that that atmosphere of that character so well. And then like you have Tom Hardy, who's like the I guess the best eye actor in the world. It seems like every time you see him, he's like covering up some of his face somehow. He's Bane, obviously, and then in this movie, he's got the mask on the plane the whole time. For Mad Max Fury Road, he's got the mask on for the first like.
I mean, obviously, a lot to be said if he can express that much and just this much of his face.
Right. And then Kenneth Branagh, I thought, was like really well cast for that role, because he kind of holds that kind of like that. I mean, he himself just has that persona of like the, what am I trying to, what words would be appropriate for Kenneth Branagh? Like,
I mean,
I
guess
I don't know, like he kind of has this very British, like,
it's very stately. It's very,
that's a good word. Stately.
I don't know. Very like proper, but also just like solid presence,
Yeah.
He very much walks into a room. It's stately.
Yes.
Like he's,
Yeah. Thank you. I think you expressed exactly what I was trying. I think maybe I sent it to you telepathically and you said it. It wasn't coming out of my mouth. And then Cillian Murphy is great too. His cast as the Shivering Soldier. Doesn't have a name. But he's great too. I think he like carries that haunted performance very well.
I mean, he just gives us the full like, I mean, just essence of fear and just being terrified and being, so completely torn up by this. And also just I feel like he really adds to the idea of war and like the lingering effects, because, all the people, like, they're handling everything that's happening to them relatively well. But when you first meet him and we meet him after, what has happened to him, but then you go and see those scenes of previously, he was so calm and collected and like seemed very much like a great soldier and stuff. And then you now see like how everything that has happened and all that has happened so suddenly as well has completely shocked him and will obviously have an effect on him for years to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you do get. I think that's important to kind of like see that in a war film is to see
Mm.
that effect that it has, which we'll probably talk about in just a little bit more. Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on the Establishing Shot today. We hope you're enjoying the episode so far, and we hope you will stick around for the segments we have coming up after this quick break. But during this break, I wanted to tell you how you can get more involved with the Establishing Shot podcast. There are several ways you can do this. The main way you can do it is by going to establishingshotpod.com, our website where you can find all sorts of information like episodes with the show notes on there, information about our guests for each episode. You can find reviews there. And there's a page where you can actually leave a review on the website if you want to. You can see all the platforms where the podcast is available, like Apple, Spotify, all the major podcast platforms, and even a link to our YouTube page where you can see a video version of the podcast. So please go to the website. And the place I want to highlight there is our donate page, which has information about our Establishing Shot family. This is a way that you can subscribe to the podcast to support all the efforts and the stuff that goes into making this podcast good and making it better than it even is now. We have different tiers that you can subscribe to, starting at $5. And what this will do is you'll be able to support the podcast, help me make it better, and also at the same time, you'll get early and ad-free episodes. You'll get access to our Discord server where you can join in and just kind of talking about movies with a community that loves film. And so we would love to have you in there. And then the higher up in the tiers you go, the more you get. Even things like chats and video chats that we'll do every once in a while where we get to talk about in more detail stuff that we're talking about on the podcast. So I hope you'll subscribe to that. Choose a tier that fits your budget, and I would love for you to support the podcast in that way. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is where you can find us on social media. You can find me personally on Twitter at @DEliPrice. And you can also follow me on Letterboxd. Letterboxd is kind of like a social media for movie reviews. So you can read my reviews there, and you can find me there at just Eli Price, no spaces or anything. So I'm on Twitter and Letterboxd. You can find the podcast on all the social platforms as well, such as Twitter at eShotPod, and then on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok at Establishing Shot Pod. So make sure to follow us so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments about the episode or about the podcast, you can always email us at establishingshotpod@gmail.com. And the very last thing I want to do before you get back into the episode today is just ask you to please go to Spotify and Apple and leave some ratings and reviews. That really helps the visibility of the podcast and gets it in more people's podcast feeds. And so we hope you will do that for us, and we would greatly appreciate it. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode, and I will see you next time on the Establishing Shot podcast. But that is a really perfect turning point to talking about some of the key aspects of this movie, one of which is like the way it is structured. Like you're jumping around in time. Like Nolan, like very like obviously at this point in his career is known for like playing with time in his movies. And really like when you think about cinema, that's what like films are. They are these like endeavors in like manipulating time, just like by nature of how they work and what they are.
Yeah.
And so, but Nolan is one of those directors that like kind of puts that in your face. Like he makes you aware that, that the time that you're watching is being manipulated. And this is like the culmination of that, that idea. Yeah. And I think it's done to great effect. It in this movie, it's all about the building of the emotion and the intensity. And I wrote down this Stanley Kubrick quote that I think is like really like applies here. He said, "A film is or should be more like music than fiction. It should be a progression of moods and feelings. The theme, what's behind the emotion, the meaning, all that comes later." And obviously, like, there's different kind of philosophies on film and different approaches. This was Kubrick's approach, and Nolan is like a great respecter of Kubrick, and so like you kind of know that Nolan has some influence there, and probably was aware of this like idea of having like the moods and the feelings and the emotions be like what's like present as you're watching, and figuring out like what it means is kind of comes after. And that's like so very true for this movie. And really like it all comes from the way it's put together, you know. It's like it really is like pure filmmaking turned up to 11. Like, let's get all these shots, let's like put like mix the sounds syncing up with the intensifying like constant climb and intensity, building all these shots together, editing together. We're jumping around, like I'm letting you know like this is a week, this is a day, this is an hour. You're so like, and even like, you know, you have these moments where you're jumping back and forth in time and you're learning new things from different perspectives because you're in a different like kind of time frame of the movie. And it's just like this, I don't know, barrage of intensity that like even just like it doesn't even just come from like the way it's like cut together, like because it's shot so much in IMAX. IMAX is a format that's so big, like usually you don't want to cut a whole lot because there's so much on screen to see. You want to give the viewer time to like see it all. And so like they even like are finding different ways to like build the intensity without, a lot of times like you build intensity by like cutting a lot, and they're finding like different ways to like move the camera to build that intensity instead of like cutting. And like a lot of that comes from doing the handheld stuff, I think, too. But yeah, it really does like feel like a third act of a movie, like we talked about way earlier. And I heard someone else say that it feels like a trailer, but in a good way. Like it's like you're watching a whole movie that's basically like the way you usually feel when you watch a movie trailer, and it's like intense and you're like, whoa, like you're totally like into it and excited. And I was like, oh, that's a fun way to think about it. But yeah, it's this manipulation of time and space, and that's like Nolan's major endeavor throughout his career. And this is, like I was saying, it's like a masterclass of montage. It's you're basically like, I mean, it really is like, it's the whole movie is I would say it's like 3 montages all like intertwining.
And it is, and the choices in those times to intertwine or times to show things, I mean, it really is interesting. It makes it all the more dynamic, and also like not confusing, but just like you can't guess what's going to happen. You can't guess what's going to happen to each individual person, because at times then you're like, oh wait, I didn't even know that. Like even the Cillian Murphy situation, like we were talking about, like you then cut later to a film or to a part of the movie where, I mean, he's out on a boat, like he is a very composed soldier who's telling other people what to do. And so you're just like, yeah, actually, I don't know what to expect from these people, because you then kind of, because of the montage effect, you're reminded you don't know these people. Because you didn't get their backstory. And so you don't know what they're capable of or what will happen to them individually or as a whole.
Or how these events will change them, you know. And like that all comes through, like I mean, you even think about like when you're making a movie that way, like continuity, you have to be so precise, like to get continuity right.
Yeah.
And even like thinking about like the trawler we were talking about, like it's being shot and, you know, all these holes and you got water coming in. Well, like you're having to like make sure your continuity is correct, because like part of that is shot on the beach. Part of it is shown after the boat's been towed back out into the ocean. Part of it's being shot on set, like when they're on the inside of it. So you have to like make sure like that everything like matches up when you edit it together. And so it's really impressive, but really like all of that tension building and like that comes from the montage effect and the way it's edited together and the shepherd tone like structure. It just like it all builds up to these like moments of convergence where everything comes together. There's like, I think there's several of those, like as you start reaching the end of the film, that like where the payoff is just like huge. So I mean, the obvious one is like, you know, the little ships arriving.
Yes, of course. Or even, you know, Tom Hardy flying over the beach and all of the, you know, soldiers cheering and everything. Like, they just really big,
him flying over the beach.
Moments.
The big one, one of the big ones that I caught this time around that I don't know that I necessarily like was focused in on before was when the Moonstone is like driving out of the oil, because it's like we can't save anybody else right here. We've got to get out of here, or the whole boat's going up too. And you know, you have the soldier being dragged through the water, and you just think like, oh, like there's one more dude they're trying to save, and then finally like his face comes out and it's Fionn Whitehead.
I know. It's our main guy.
And it's like this it's like this moment where you're like, whoa, like and the payoff is huge. And I love that, you know, even like thinking about like when you see, because you see Collins, which is, you know, Ferrier's dogfighting partner up in the air, you see him go down and Ferrier sees him and he's like, okay, he's okay. But then like later, like you get the moment where the Moonstone's coming up and he's stuck in there. Like it's really actually this intense moment. And it's just like, there's moments of like convergence where like all the timelines are coming together, like have such huge payoff. Some other themes were there any that like stood out to you that like really spoke to you as far as like just like something that this movie affected in you personally?
Well, I think that going back to, I was saying about the few storylines that I did remember, one of them being George's, and then that is kind of the one character you kind of get to know a bit when he's talking about he just wanted to do something with his life. And, you know, you're seeing him and, you know, this older man and this other guy who kind of, you know, his friend kind of seems like, George, like, what are you doing, buddy? Like, you probably shouldn't be out here. But then to have, you know, all of them to kind of step up like as civilians, to be heroes, to bring these guys home. And even though he didn't make it, and then even seeing his friend kind of have a really, I would say, just like courageous, heroic moment to tell Killian that George will be fine, that he didn't die. And then of course to put his friend in the newspaper. I think that all of those moments are kind of like, this is like the spirit of these people, and what they accomplished that day is like they had a million little victories, not just this big victory of like bringing home all these soldiers. They, you know, there was a million little stories, and all of these people didn't necessarily sign up for it that day, but they all learned things about themselves, and they were all heroes in small ways, even though of course 1,000 of them won't be remembered because they were just random guys taking their boats to pick up other random guys who often, so many of these guys won't be remembered, you know? We don't know, did they die 5 days later? Did they survive still till today? You know, we don't know. Their families might, but that's kind of all. They're just this mass group, but they're all heroes in their own right.
Right. Yeah. It's all these little things. It's the culmination of all these like little choices too. That kind of like, I guess, like in a sense mirrors all the culmination of all the, like the little filmmaking choices,
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Yeah, just thinking about like the effects that it has on everyone, and like on like each individual person, like in the moment, I guess like just thinking about what you've been talking about alongside what we were talking about before, of like how the, thinking about that Kubrick quote about how the themes and the what it means all comes later. And it's almost like that's the perfect way to do a war film, because
Yeah.
especially if you're wanting to give the perspective of the people in the middle of it,
Yeah.
because those people that are in the middle of it, they only have time for like that immediate emotion. They don't have time to dig into what does this mean? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
how is it going to change me? How is it going to affect me? They're just like in the intense present moment emotions of it all. And so like, really, like that's perfect for this film. Like,
yeah,
that is trying to express like that intensity of emotion. And then like you finish the film and you're like, wow, what was going on here? Like, what does it mean? How can I like dissect this and digest it,
yeah,
and you kind of have to do that afterwards. But that's the same for these soldiers and these like civilians that cross the channel. They don't have time to digest it and dissect it in the moment. That's later,
yeah. That's all the things that linger, and all of the stories and the way it's shaped them to be
right.
who they will be after this.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like, the Dunkirk spirit is kind of something that like British people talk about. It's like it kind of means different things to different people. Everyone kind of, there was like a ton of like talking heads on the special features, like different people of the crew kind of saying what Dunkirk spirit meant. And they all kind of had these like different variations of like similar answers, but it was like different. Each one was like different, which was kind of cool. Like grit in the face of adversity was one. But Nolan said to him, it's like this pulling together of community and like what can be achieved when we pull together to do something, and I thought that was a cool way to think about like the Dunkirk spirit or whatever. But it's really this communal heroism that's being displayed. I mean, you have 338,000 soldiers rescued on this stretch of 18 kilometers of beach. And it's this, I don't know, it's this strange like sense of like the victory is in the survival. The victory is in just like living to see another day, like getting, because like at the end of the day, this isn't a war victory, this is a retreat, like this is a defeat in the sense of war. But like it's been like over time, like with the hindsight of history and like that point of view we have now, like this was a huge victory, like even though in the moment it was this really like huge defeat.
Well, and you definitely see that in them coming home on the train, and like Harry Styles' character thinking that everyone is going to be so ashamed of them, because that's what he feels, of like they didn't do their job and they retreated and they ran home. And of course all of these British civilians being like, no, like we want you home, we don't want you to just go out there and die for no reason. Like you can fight tomorrow, but today just so many
here.
of you survived, and we all came together and we made it happen. And like that's a huge victory. And it also just like the victory and the hope of it all, like that hope of this being accomplished at this time, I'm sure brought so much power back to the British people in order to keep going, because they obviously were not even close to done with this war, and it would get even worse on their own land, with bombs in London and all that. So these moments of victory, if they hadn't had them, obviously they would have lost so many soldiers and like lost so much momentum. But all of the things that they gained by, even as civilians, being able to do something to help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I mean, you do get like moments of like more traditional individual heroism with so
Yeah.
you think about like Farrier is kind of like an example of that. Which
Yeah.
like fun fact, Nolan said that it was that kind of whole part was not based on at all, but like more of like a tribute to his grandfather, who like they would hear stories about their grandfather, and he actually died flying bomber missions with the RAF, which is the Royal Air Force.
Yeah.
Which is, that's kind of a cool thing too.
Yeah.
But really, like I said, it's this communal heroism that's on display. It's survival as a people, as its own like kind of version of courage. Because really, like, there's a sense in which like surviving is like courageous in a situation like this, and I guess like that's another like subtle way that it's like a horror movie, because like if you, especially like you think of like the slasher movies where like you get to the end of the movie and like this character that you've been with finally gets away and they survive, and there's this like visceral reaction of victory, which really like all this person did was like not die.
Yeah.
But it's almost
but
like
it's huge.
Yeah, but it's almost like it goes back to what the blind guy says when they're filing out of the train. He's telling them well done, and the soldier says, well, all we did was survive, and he said that's enough. Which is a really touching moment for one. But it's true. It's this idea of like your existence justifies itself, and surviving is enough, and I think that's really cool. And I think that's something that like is very present in those horror movies like that, but also like in movies like this, where like the existence of these young men, like their existence justifies itself, like their survival is important in and of itself, without having to have some like greater meaning behind it, because they're people, they're humans, and humans are like, we deserve to live.
And they're a part of this community, and the fact that they weren't lost from it, it's a huge thing.
For sure. One of the questions, so I usually reference Elijah Davidson. He has this little like almost like kind of devotional book going through Nolan's filmography called Transcending Time, and he kind of it's like each entry for each movie is pretty short, and it has like a little prayer at the end. Is pretty cool. And he kind of poses the question like, what good can one pleasure boat do? Which I thought was like, oh, that's a interesting like just framing question to think about the themes of this movie. But like, it really, like, when you think about it along those lines of like survival being just its own form of courage, like even like if only one pleasure boat showed up and it saved the 30 men, like that's like important enough.
Huge.
That's huge. It's 30 people's lives. Like, it's out of 300, like 400,000. Sure. But like, it's 30 lives that are saved.
Yeah.
But
that's
like,
30 lives. That's 30 families who,
exactly. Yeah. But what turns out happening is it's those little choices made by a lot of people coming together. And all those like good little choices, like all come together to do something like miraculous, to do something like incredible. And and I think that's just a really cool like thing to think about, that's like just like so viscerally present in this movie, and like obvious and blatant, and like it's not some like subtle artistic like idea. It's just like it's real, and
it's the point.
But and then like along with that, the cool, like I guess this is like kind of jumping back to production stuff that I kind of threw in right here in the notes because it's really cool, is they got in contact with the Dunkirk Association of Little Ships. And so there's this association that like keeps track of, and like that people are members of, that they have all these little ships that were a part of that Operation Dynamo that like went across the channel to save, these men at Dunkirk. And all these ships, like they keep them restored and in good condition.
Oh, cool.
And these, there's these families that own these ships that like take care of them. And it's really cool. And so they actually used a ton of these ships.
Oh, cool.
In the movie. And like the families that own the ships, like were like drove them across the channel, and like were like in the movie, like driving their own ships that they owned that were actually at Dunkirk on that day in 1940. And like it was this week of shooting, and like everyone's just talking about how like surreal and powerful it was to have these actual ships that like saved and rescued all these men, like pulling, like you're not actual soldiers, but like you're there experiencing it, like you're pulling these men into these boats just like it did 75 years ago. Just like an incredible moment. And I love this. Nolan kind of said in one of the interviews around all of these ideas, he said that one myth of movies that you see a lot is that one person can save the world. And he said, but Dunkirk shows that it takes a community. And I thought that was really cool. Really cool, really powerful. And like at the end of the day, like it really isn't just a British story. Like it's a human story. It's about surviving and surviving so that there can be a hope of flourishing, and kind of holding on to that hope in the midst of all the chaos that you're in the midst of, is really cool. Were there any other moment? I mean, like, any like really just standout shots from the movie or moments that you wanted to mention before we kind of get to final thoughts?
Well, I did think that the helmets on the beach, and I see that you have that, listed on the notes, but the helmets on the beach also, like, it's such a beautiful shot. And I feel like when you cut back to it, kind of because you've been with like the boys and like loading on the ships and like all this triumph and seeing all those helmets is like, it really brings back that realization of like, this is how many bodies, this is how many deaths could have occurred. And for so many reasons, and for so many little choices, and for so many brave acts, there's so many people that did it, that made it out. And, obviously we don't know their stories. We don't know if they made it to the end of the war, but they made it out that day. And it is just truly remarkable. And also I feel like in that moment, in that shot, it brought back to the fact of, this is not, like just a falsified story. This is a real event that occurred. And like, because at times, of course, anytime you're watching a movie, even if you know it's based off a real story, you kind of get wrapped up in just the movie.
Right.
And then that shot just felt very much just like a history book shot, something that you'd be like, wow, that's kind of, this is real. These were people, it happened. And it, so many people.
Yeah, and it really does, like, it's this like beautiful and striking, but also like kind of haunting image, and it does like make you, I guess, in that perspective, like you're like, man, there could have been so many more helmets on this beach.
So many more. I mean, so many more.
Yeah, and then the other like really like striking images, like a farrier looking at the plane on fire, which they. That wasn't obviously a Spitfire. Those people love those Spitfire planes. They like revere them. So like you would never in a million years
one just for
burn a Spitfire plane. Like they kind of built some up to look like Spitfires, like a closely related plane. But I thought that was funny. Like watching, they were like, "You do not destroy Spitfire." but that image is like striking, and just kind of represents, that individual sacrifice, and that, that like, was vital for, it just, again, all those individual choices, like, of sacrifice, like, all culminate and build together, to make like a miraculous thing happen. We talked about the, that's enough from the blind guy, which I thought was like really powerful. I was like touched, you've heard like Branagh say like, home before in the movie, but the moment where the little ships come in and he's looking through the binoculars, he's like, what do you see? And he says home. It's like, oh, you got me right in the heart. But yeah, there's a lot of like just striking images. You talked about earlier, Peter telling the shivering soldier, that George was he lies to him and says that he's gonna be okay. Like, man, that even just shows like you haven't like grown with this character a lot. You haven't like interacted with him a lot. You've seen him, in action. But earlier in the movie, he had like told him like, no, he's not going to be okay. And like, even in that just short span of time, how much that kid has grown and understands, like, this is what he needs. He needs to be able to hold on to some sort of hope.
Yeah. The humanity and compassion of it all,
And really, like, it's funny because like, we're talking about like the victory of it all, but really like there's these like little moments that kind of undercut that victory too. Like the shot of the plane on fire is kind of like this paradox, because it represents that personal sacrifice of victory of, survival of everyone else. But it's also like, it's the one moment where you kind of see some German soldiers, and it's kind of like cuts you back into reality of like, oh yeah, like, this is this much
isn't over. This was
it's like a small maybe victory, but it's like it's like it's just prolonging what like the inevitable that you're going to have to deal with. And then like the other moment that I think of is when Fionn Whitehead is reading the Churchill address from the newspaper. You kind of open with his face, and then the very end of the movie, like it's like it ends back on his face, and but when I was watching it, it struck me because you expect to read this like, Churchill speech, and it's like so well constructed and written and hopeful, and you expect it to be this like triumphant moment of reading this Churchill address,
where the music swells and he gets louder and everything.
But it ends with him kind of looking up from the newspaper, and it doesn't feel like, he doesn't feel like that. It's his face is almost like he's like, I hear what Churchill's saying, but he hasn't experienced what I just experienced. Kind of you kind of like can read that on his face. And it's like
those are nice words, but this isn't done, and tomorrow is another day where we're gonna have to keep fighting.
Churchill is like obviously like vital for like keeping that spirit going in the country.
For sure.
So like, I'm not meaning to like undercut.
No,
but, like,
and it's necessary, but
it's just these kind of like small necessary moments that Nolan like includes to like remind you that like, but this isn't about like this triumphant feeling. Like, don't get carried away with that sort of thing. I don't know. Did you have anything else? I have one final thought that I thought was really cool.
Go for it.
Okay. This is all I have to say too. This is also from Elijah Davidson from his little Transcending Time book, this idea. Because, I have some original thoughts, but this one was just like, man, this is better than all of my original thoughts. It's just this cool way to think about it. He talks about how like the asynchronous action is edited together in such a way that it creates this like inevitability of everything like coming together. Like you're building and building and building all these like, you know, asynchronous, meaning like out of time, like they're kind of like scattered around in their different time frames or whatever. But it does like it creates this like feeling of like this is all going to come to something. And to come to like an apex, like a culmination of everything. And it does, and it's almost like this, you can almost say like it's this idea of maybe like fate, if you want to call it that, or something that is being like expressed in the like the way that the movie's structured and edited together. But what he kind of took away from that was this idea of like this storyteller having this eternal perspective, which I thought was a really interesting and cool way to think about it. And interesting to just think of when you're thinking of film in general and the way that like film plays with time. And it's because the storyteller has this like outside of the time of the story perspective. It's like it, for all intents and purposes, is like this eternal perspective, as relative to the story they're telling. They can see the beginning and middle and end and how everything plays together. It's this like outside of time perspective. And I was just thinking about how like really like stories and our stories that we read or hear or watch can do that for us, like in our personal lives. Like it can give us this, you kind of can give yourself over to this story and let it like wash over you and experience it like you experience the movie Dunkirk. And it gives you this like more like precise and eternal kind of in a sense perspective on things that like help you to kind of like maybe process something you're going through, or to like be able to, you know, see something in a new perspective, because you're getting this like, I don't know, this storyteller's perspective. And I was just thinking about how like that's why stories are so important, because they are able to like inject us with hope and peace in the midst of whatever chaos might be going on in your life, whatever things that are out of your control are happening. And you know, we tell stories and they help ground us and, you know, help us get through those moments, help us to like, you know, like the Dunkirk spirit, to push forward in the midst of adversity. You know, having that hope that you get from stories, you know, helps you to keep acting in the moment that you're in, even if it like doesn't feel like you're going to get out of it, which is exactly what that Dunkirk spirit is partly about. So yeah, I just thought that was really like cool. And it really like, when I was reading it, it really like spoke to me personally. And I thought it was like well worth like sharing that.
That's a great perspective and note on it. And
I think that's all of our Dunkirk talk. Do you have so you've seen, let me think, you've seen 4 Nolan movies, is that right?
Yes, 4 of them.
You've got some work to do, Kara.
I know. It's just that some of them are, you know, like I said before, I want to see, and some of it's just that I haven't taken the time to commit to it, or I want to see it in a different way, and others are just that they don't really interest me. So
that's fine.
But you know,
so what, out of the 4 you've seen, where would you put this one? Is this
I would say that I think that this is the one that I would recommend the most. It's definitely high up for me, and it's the one I would recommend also because of like, it is different. It is interesting. Like you can gain an interest in it in a way that's outside of Christopher Nolan himself. Like you don't have to just be like into him. Like I feel like Tenet you probably should be a Christopher Nolan fan in order to like
Sure.
really dive into that, or I wouldn't recommend it unless I knew you liked Christopher Nolan. Whereas Dunkirk, it's just like, I think it has a lot for a vast majority to gain from and like have piqued their interest. And I also love just like how much he was able to accomplish in a shorter time frame compared to all of his other movies. And I think that kind of speaks for itself as well. And something, again, like you were saying earlier, like some of the choices he made in this film, I don't think he would have made if he had made this movie years previous. And I think that even that runtime would have been different had he made it at a different point in his career or his life, because I think that maybe a little bit of wisdom and maturity knew that like, no, you want to make it concise because you want everything to be striking and the momentum to be there and everything.
Yeah, for sure. This is still like one of my favorites. For me, it's like a 10 out of 10, 5-star movie.
Yeah, for sure.
Like I said, I think it's like the way it's constructed, the way it communicates everything you need with such little like dialogue or exposition. Just like just like the visceral experience of everything, almost literally everything that you're seeing being something that's like captured in camera for real. It's just like, it's an incredible experience. If this ever shows like in IMAX again, like I'm gonna try to get out and see it too. For sure.
You never know, maybe like on the anniversary of like Dunkirk itself or something, they might like
maybe so. One can hope, but
for sure.
For sure. But yeah, like I said, we'll see. I haven't recorded the Interstellar episode yet, so maybe
it might win you back, but you never know.
Interstellar might drop below. Right now, I would still like put Interstellar as my favorite, just because I can't like push this above it. I think at different points I've flip-flopped them in my like Letterboxd ranking. Just because I can never decide which one I like more. Interstellar like gets me in a totally different way though.
Sure.
It's one of his most emotionally impactful for me personally. So that would be.
They're very different movies, so they can hold a number one spot. Both of them can, I think.
They can be co-champs for me, I guess. But that's really it for this movie. We're obviously talking about Tenet next week. And so excited about talking through that.
I mean, that's a good movie, a lot to discuss, I'm sure.
Yes. I haven't seen that since I saw it in theaters. So I'm interested to revisit it for sure. I don't know. I'm hoping I like it more this time, and then I did. Not that I disliked it before, but
I really enjoyed it. But I think that now having like, because when I got out of the theater, like reading articles and stuff like that, now I feel like you would go back into it maybe with a little bit more like understanding and being able to pick up on stuff that in the first time you were just like, whoa, what is going on?
For sure. Yeah. Well, and that's what we're going to do next week. This is usually where we take a quick break and come back and do like movie news and our movie draft. We're not going to be doing that this week. Just the way scheduling worked out, it just, we're just not able to do that. It would have been probably fun to do like a war movie draft or something like that. But in the stead of that, we're going to just make our recommendation of the week. Just war movies that we would recommend that we like, maybe like one or two each. So I don't know. Did you have anything in mind for that, Kara? War movies that you would recommend?
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, you could deep dive into a million. I mean, obviously, there's a million and one war movies, and there's war adjacent movies, and there's all this stuff. But one that I don't know that tons of people watch, but I saw and I thought was so good, and it really was like it was another edge of your seat. Like me and my parents, stepped away from it being like, wow, that was really good, and we were impressed by it. Was Greyhound, which was on Apple TV. Got Tom Hanks, and about him, taking boats during World War II. So, similar time area, but, taking them from America over to Europe, and very intense, another very much survive the day kind of movie. And I thought it was very, well done, and I really enjoyed that movie. And just because it was on Apple TV, I don't know that many people, sought it out, or even if they have Apple TV, like really sat down and watched it. But I think if you have it, it's a good one to watch, or even if you just get like a little 7-day trial or something on Apple, then it'd be worth one of the ones to see.
Make a new email and get a new trial,
Yeah, I think that one was really good and worth seeing. And then another movie, because we said maybe two. This is not a war movie. However, I do want to recommend it because it has a Dunkirk-esque ending with literal small boats coming to rescue these guys, which is, I don't know if you've ever seen it or heard of it, but it's the movie Pirate Radio. It's another British film about...
I don't know that one.
Yeah, it's about a moment in British history in the 60s where rock and roll music was banned from British radios, and radio stations came up with inventive ways of getting around that, which meant being on ships off of the shore, broadcasting rock and roll music to the British audience. But in this movie, which has Bill Nye and Chris O'Dowd and Philip Seymour Hoffman and so many great people, and then obviously it's rock and roll music, so it's so so much great Brit rock is in the soundtrack and everything. But just a very funny, silly movie about these guys who are on a radio, on a ship. They have a radio station broadcasting British rock, and then at one point they have to move the ship. The ship starts to go down, and they put a call out on their radio before the ship goes under, saying if anyone's in this area, here's our coordinates, please come, we're gonna go down and we're all gonna die on this boat. And just like in Dunkirk, another British moment, all of these fans of this radio station come out on their personal boats and save all of the DJs and all of that stuff. And it really, I was like, that I didn't connect the two, and I'm like, oh yeah, duh, that's exactly where they got the inspiration for this.
For sure.
While that's
without a doubt.
Yeah, while that's a true moment in British history of rock and roll music being banned and everything and all of that, the storyline and this cast is all obviously fictional, and so they gave it a good old British Dunkirk end to make a triumph finale. So if you're thinking war movie, I think Greyhound is good, and if you're thinking just a very British Dunkirk-esque movie, then Pirate Radio is a good one.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. I mean, there's obvious ones like Apocalypse Now is kind of masterpiece, definitely an anti-war film. One of my favorites is by a director that I love, Terrence Malick, his The Thin Red Line. It's a very different, it's similar to Dunkirk in that it's a very different sort of war movie. Malick has this more poetic way of making movies than kind of prose narrative, and so it applies to The Thin Red Line too. And then a couple of maybe ones that a lot of people have heard of those two. But I guess two that are would be off of people's radar. We talked about Guillermo del Toro earlier, but his Pan's Labyrinth deals a lot with war and the effects of war on the little girl in the movie specifically, whose father is a general. And so I would recommend that. It's a very strange, fantastical kid's point of view sort of look at the effects of war and hate. But then another one that I really enjoyed, it didn't get huge critical praise, but Spike Lee's Da 5 Bloods, which came out in 2020, was really good. It has a fantastic cast with Delroy Lindo and Jonathan Majors are in it, and it's a really interesting. It's about for African American Vietnam veterans. They're going back to Vietnam because they had buried some like treasure that they had found, and they're like going back to try to find it. Yeah, it's a really interesting, like, different kind of movie.
Yeah.
Spike Lee is, it's a Spike Lee movie, so naturally, but yeah, those are maybe a couple that are maybe off of people's radar that I would recommend. But yeah, that's pretty much all we have. That was our recommendations of the week. Kara, where can people follow you?
Okay, yes. So my Instagram account is Kara Rates Things, and it's Kara Rates Things. So again, like I said, not a very critical, rater, but I do just recommend things that I like. So if you see movies on there that you're like, oh yeah, I love these movies, then chances are you might like whatever comes next on there.
Yeah. Yeah. Gotta love it. So, you can follow Kara there. I'll put it in the show notes. But yeah, we're wrapping up. Like I said, next week we're going to be covering Tenet. Looking forward to that conversation. But until then, I've been Eli Price for Kara Smith. You've been listening to The Establishing Shot. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us on The Establishing Shot today. We hope you enjoyed the episode and got a lot out of it. Make sure before you go to like and subscribe on all your podcast platforms, and especially on Spotify and Apple. If you could leave a rating and review, that would greatly help the visibility of the podcast, and I would greatly appreciate it. Again, if you go to establishingshotpod.com, you can find out all you need to know about the show, where to find us on the social media platforms, where to find us podcast-wise, YouTube, and you can even leave a voicemail there on the website on the right side of your screen. So click that if you want to give a comment or ask a question about the show. Just feel free to leave a voicemail. We'd be happy to feature that on the show. And also, if you just want to email rather than leave a voicemail, you can email us at establishingshotpod@gmail.com, and we would be happy to answer your question there or feature a question or comment on the show if it pertains to the episodes. So please do that, and we would love for you to join the Establishing Shot family. You can, again, find where to do that on the donate page at establishingshotpod.com. We hope you have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.